Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Mr. Byron Kerr. Byron is the radio play-by-play voice for George Washington University. He works in a number of roles with the Washington Nationals. He's also doing play-by-play work for the Big Ten Network and the VCU Rams and ESPN Plus, and quite a diverse guy, very versatile. Byron, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, great to be with you, Billy. How you doing today?
Doing well. Well, that's where I wanted to go first. Is obviously we're in the middle of this pandemic. It's affected all of our lives, both professionally and personally. So how's it affected yours, both with your work and of course at home?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, you have to be very, very careful in this pandemic and what's been going on. So if you start with the Nationals, they obviously only had a 60-game season, and we worked in the press box with about 25, 30 members. The press box, as you know, in venues like that can hold 250, 300 people. And we had to go through protocols as you would imagine to do that. You had to wear a mask the entire time. And the only time you got the chance to talk to the manager or the players is through a Zoom call just like this. So there wasn't a lot of those secondary stories that I used to love to do about the prospects and the young guys coming up. It was just the basics of each game. So that made it really difficult. The only fun part was you got to actually watch a baseball game, but that wasn't as fun because there wasn't 45,000 people there watching the games. Every time there was a big hit, Billy, you would just hear the bench go crazy and you wouldn't hear any fans. So that made it really difficult. I felt very sad for the Nationals fans last year, especially coming off that World Series. And as for college basketball, as you can imagine at Virginia Tech, it has been difficult as well for every team. And I'm part of something called Tier 3 with George Washington. So when I come in to do the radio and television games, do the games on ESPN Plus, I have to go to the second level and I walk through a separate entryway and come out a separate entryway. I never have any communication or close communication with the players or coaches. So I call the game from that with a mask on the entire game. I have to have COVID tests every week in order to go on the campus at GW. And so it's really difficult. And I'm not traveling with the team this year. I'm not doing any road games. I've added some responsibilities doing the women's games as well. So I do the men's and women's games at home. So that's fun to be a part of both of those programs. But as we've talked about, it's a lot different than normally you would do a game, and you don't obviously get to be with the team and see how they're doing day to day. That makes it very difficult.
For sure. Well, let's go back to more happier times. When did you first know that you wanted to work in sports?
Well, I went to UVA and I started in the radio station there as a freshman. Um, Also started working with the athletics department at Virginia in all the non-revenue sports. I read in the school newspaper when I was a freshman that the PA announcer for non-revs was graduating, and so I found out, the boss of that person and went and applied for that, and I got the job as the announcer for women's basketball, men's soccer, field hockey, lacrosse, baseball. And it was such an exciting time for me to be able to be a part of that. I also got to be the press box announcer for football. When you're in the football press box, it's the guy doing the drive charts for all the press, calling all the tackles and the runs and the passes and stuff. So that was really exciting for a kid in school. And then I was obviously doing sports updates for WUVA, the radio station there. So that was trial by fire for me too. I didn't have an actual TV radio major. I just majored in communications at UVA. And that's how I all got started in working in the sports department. That was huge for me, as you know, Billy, at Virginia Tech, to be able to be a part of that. I got to travel to NCAA tournaments, or you run stats, you do anything to be a part of the action, and that was a great experience for me early on in school. That's how I started off. I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in college. At first, I had an Army ROTC scholarship to be an engineer, which Hokies understand, a great engineering school. I applied to Virginia Tech and I applied to UVA. So those are the two schools that I was thinking about back then. After a year in engineering, I decided that's not quite what I wanted to do. So I switched over to communications, and that's how it all started for me. Fell in love with it, and got a lot of great experience at school. And then that helped me move on after school to get a professional job.
That's awesome to hear. So how did this opportunity open up with George Washington?
Well, after I was done in Charlottesville, I moved back up into Leesburg, and my dad was running the Air Force ROTC at Southern Illinois University. So they had all moved away. It was just me, and my aunt and uncle lived in Percival. So I lived in their basement for that first summer trying to find a job. And I got a job at a little AM station in Leesburg called WAGE, AM 1200, and started off as a Saturday host and worked my way up to mornings, did sports for them. They were doing George Mason basketball back then. And same thing, made some calls, tried to get into it, and found out that George Mason didn't have a color commentator at that time. They had a play-by-play guy, but no color commentator. So I got the job doing home games as the color commentator for George Mason. Eventually, that play-by-play guy moved. They had guys like Dave Johnson, who does the Wizards, do play-by-play there. They had Dan Miller, who does play-by-play for the Detroit Lions. He was there as well. And I finally got the job as play-by-play with George Mason, I think in the early 90s. Worked there for 13 years and started building up a resume there. While I was working at Wage, uh, uh, Larry Michael, who used to be with the Redskins, was running Mutual Radio in Crystal City. And he heard me on the radio, and that's how I got a job at Mutual Radio doing sports for them. I was just an intern at first, then I worked in cutting tape. Back in those days, you had the little carts and the reel to reels, nothing digital back then. So you worked all that stuff, you cut all that stuff, and I finally got to be a weekend sports anchor for them on a national level. That was a huge breakthrough. It was something called Mutual Radio, and that I worked there for a long time. And he was the voice of George Washington basketball before he became the Redskins announcer. So in 2005, I think when he got the job with the Redskins, he put my name in for GW, and that's how I got GW. Been there for a long time as well, and got a lot of great experience working my way up through those. So it's been George Mason and George Washington for the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, that's awesome. And let me ask you about the role that I know you most by, and that's with your capacity with the Washington Nationals. I mean, you've done pregame and postgame hosting for them. You
Yeah.
work with Masson Sports now, writing stories for them. I mean, how's it been like to work in all kinds of capacities with the Nationals?
Yeah, that's been a lot of fun. I got a job. I was actually the Washington Mystics play-by-play for 6 seasons, and the guy that was doing the directing for that, Chris Glass, who was the executive producer at Masson, was the part of starting the Nationals broadcast for Masson. And same thing, Johnny Holiday, who's the voice of the Maryland Terrapins, was the pregame, postgame host, and he needed someone to back up Johnny. And so I applied for that and got that. I did like 30 or 35 games a year usually as the pregame, postgame host. I did a couple of months as the sideline reporter when Debbie Taylor was having her baby. So I got a lot of great experience early on with the Nationals and kind of learning baseball, as I went along. In 2009, after I worked at WTOP radio for a long time as doing sports. After I left there, they massinsports.com needed a writer to help back up the first writer then. And I started working in the minor leagues, writing stories about the prospects for the Nationals in 2009, and developed a really great following. I was able to break a lot of stories over the years, and a lot of coaches who I worked with back then became good friends and tell me how the prospects were doing with the Nationals. So that's how I started working there. And then eventually I would start writing at the Nationals games for the Major League Club. So it's Mark Zuckerman and I, and we both write for massinsports.com, and we started writing about the team then. And it's so much fun to get to know those guys. And you have those moments where you come back from a season, and I think it was Manny Actor, one of the managers, walked by during clubhouse time that first game. He goes, "Hey Byron, how you doing?" I'm like, "Whoa, he knows my name." It's like, so that was cool. You're doing a sideline gig in Cincinnati at the Reds game, and I'm sitting taking notes in the dugout, and Ryan Zimmerman walks by and takes his glove and taps me on the knee, and I'm like, "Oh, Billy, man, this is so cool." So you get those moments that are really, really cool about when you're with a major league team or you're with any team in general, and you feel like you're part of the team, even though you're just a writer or something like that. So it's been really rewarding, obviously, to see what the Nationals have been able to do, have all those playoff appearances, and then win the World Series. It's been a fun journey to be along with, and at least get to write some stories. Usually, that's what I miss so much, Billy, is when when COVID wasn't around, I used to be able to travel with the team for one series a month, and that was so much fun because you get to write the stories yourself. You get to pick the stories you want to write. I would do a story on the outfielders and how they figured out where to stand for each batter. They had little cards they would use. So I went to the outfield coordinator, the third base coach, Bobby Henley, and he showed me a card and how they worked, how Juan Soto, Victor Robles, and Adam Eaton would stand, whether they would move for a left-handed batter or a right-handed batter. So I love those kind of intricate stories, and I would kind of jump in, do a deep dive into those. And those are the kind of stories that I remember that are a lot of fun when I get to kind of get behind the scenes. And, when Steven Strasburg was a rookie, I got to be able to talk to him. And I think my wife was out of town or something like that. There was a big blizzard in Northern Virginia, and the kids were banging on the door. And I was holding the door trying to talk to Steven Strasburg about how his knee was doing as a rookie. So those are some special stories, and it's been a great run. A lot of fun to be a part of that team. And I've done PA announcing for the Nationals. I've done sideline for them. I've done pregame, postgame. I've written about the team. So you really feel a part of the squad when you go there, because you have so many different things that you can do.
For sure. And I wanted to ask you about the season last year when they won the World Series. Of course, all the fans remember the great run they had. What do you remember particularly about covering the team? And is there maybe a story behind the scenes that fans might not know about that team that you might be able to share?
That's a great question. It was a fun run for the squad, and to see what they did, obviously, when they were 19 and 31, and being able to move back and move up and be, get a chance to get into the postseason. They had so many games where they had lost the big game. You remember in 2012, 14, 16, and 17, where they had gotten to game 5 of a division series and not been able to go over it. So the fact they were able to finally win it was very, very special. But there was a there was a one celebration, I think, when they had the celebrations for the team in the locker room. They would put down this kind of tarp, I guess, and I was walking around trying to get interviews with the players, and there's champagne spraying, Billy, everybody's going crazy, getting excited. Excuse me. And I see Steven Strasburg at his locker, and I'm so excited. Oh, no one's talking to Steven Strasburg, right? So I go over to try to talk to him, and I slip. Okay. And I slide, I fall, and I end up at his feet and bump him a little bit. And he goes, "Are you okay?" And he helps me up. And I go, "Steven, I'm so sorry." He goes, "Be careful, buddy." And I was so embarrassed, Billy. Like it almost knocked over one of the starting pitchers during the celebration. And, because I was sliding on a wet floor that had beer and champagne and everything. So you remember those moments. Another one was with before the World Series championship run was Bryce Harper at his locker. He had a corner locker, and everybody, obviously all the cameramen and stuff, would always cram around him to get a chance to talk to Bryce. And he would set up his bats along the wall, lined up, right? And there was one time there where, how it is when there are guys holding a big camera and they kind of move around. Well, I started getting pushed to the left, and trying to get my microphone in, and I touched one of his bats, and it's like a domino effect. All the bats just kind of slammed like to the ground. And I was like, there had to be like 20 people there, like interviewing Bryce Harper, right? And I'm like, oh no, he's gonna let me have it. And he just kept on doing the interview. And after it was over, I'm trying to help him get the bats up. And I go, "Bryce, I'm so sorry. I knocked over the bats." And he goes, "Don't worry about it, Byron. There were no hits in those bats anyway." So, it's like those kind of cool moments that you remember, that are special. And yeah, it was a great run to see those guys be able to turn things around, because you get to know them, Billy, as you know, when you talk to the Hokies football team or the basketball team, you get to know them as humans, as people, more so than baseball. And that's where the best stories I got in the last 15 years is, don't talk to them about baseball, talk to them about something else, whether it's their favorite other sports team, whether it's a Netflix series, whether it's, what they used to do in the off season, and those are the kind of stories that I remember the most from talking to the guys, because then they kind of let their guard down a little bit and they relax. When you talk to them about baseball, they know it's business, and sometimes they're a little guarded, but if you can get to know them about something else, then that really is helpful.
There's definitely some great insight. I was wondering, how do you prep for a game? I mean, you do all kinds of sports. You do baseball, you do basketball. So what is your process? Let's say you've got a George Washington game coming up on Friday. What's your process from today to Friday to prepare for that game?
Um, Usually what I'll do is a few days in advance, I'll get a hold of the sports information director for the other team. Last week it was UMass. We were supposed to play, but it was postponed. But I talked to their guy. He can usually get me in touch with their head coach or an assistant. And I try to talk to them. They're usually more than happy to talk to me. Usually you can grab them before a shoot around if it's not COVID or something like that. and you talk to the other coach, you get a kind of a perspective of what they're going through, so that you know what UMass is going through, what's the highs and lows, how they feeling, who's injured, what's going on there. You get that guy to send you the game notes, the stats, everything that's going on with the team, who's dressing, who's not dressing, things like that. So that's a good insight. Same thing with George Washington. Usually before every game, the night before, Jamie and Christian, the head coach, I'll call them on a Zoom, just like I'm doing with you here, and we'll go over, what do they expect for the game the next day. So that is usually very helpful. And what I'll do is I'll print out the year-to-date stats for each team, whether it's in the conference or full, and I'll start putting my boards together. A lot of guys have those gigantic boards they use, all the fancy professional stuff. If I have one, I could show you, but that's a good way to study. Obviously, when you go over every player, write all the biographical information down, points, rebounds, assists. I find their career highs, whether it's their career high overall and then their season high. I find their free throws, how many free throws they make per game, three-pointers, how many three-pointers they make per game, blocks, steals, turnovers, what they did in their last game. I'll go through the box score for the last game they played. And sometimes when you're in conference, if Virginia Tech plays Virginia or Duke or North Carolina twice, go look at what they did against that team the last time they faced him. What did that player do? Did he have a big game against Duke the last time he played him? Stuff like that. So that's usually the charts I have. Then I'll have a second page that will have notes of what's going on for each team. So that usually I can do that usually a couple of days in advance. If you're traveling with the team, you can do it at the shoot around, you can do it on the plane, you can do it on the bus. So it really helps me to study, to get to know those things. And the number one thing, obviously, for a play-by-play guy is to not screw up the pronunciation. So I make sure I work on the pronunciations as well, because that's the first thing that can really get someone to notice that you're not ready for this, or that you don't know that team very well, is that you're mispronouncing the guys' names. Or like I'm watching a broadcast yesterday and the guy called a scholarship player a walk-on. So that he doesn't know that team very well. So usually about 48 hours before in season, I'll get really jumping in. But that's the things I'll print out, is the stats, the last game they played, and try to get some interviews with the coaches. That really, really helps. Or if it's not COVID, Billy, go to the shoot around, go to the practices so you can see the guys in person.
So then on the flip side, how do you come up with stories for writing? I mean, you talk about working with the Nationals. You've got 162 game season during normal times. I mean, how do you come up with stories, frequently to interest the fans and your following?
Well, that's what I'm going through right now, Billy, is, trying to figure out what we're going to talk about. And, I've done a deep dive, like on all these players. A lot of times I can get information, get the numbers from most of these players. And what's great about my job, Billy, is the prospects. They want to talk, right? Because they're trying to develop, a signature for them, because they're trying to make it to the major league. So they're excited about you talking to them. So the players are really easy to talk to. And, this week the last 2 weeks, I talked to the outfield coordinator, Gary Thurman. He used to play for the Kansas City Royals. And he talked to me about Victor Robles. That's a story I'm going to be doing in the next week or so, about Robles put on a lot of weight, put on a lot of strength, but did that affect his speed and agility in center field? That's an interesting story that he'll kind of give me some knowledge on. So these coordinators are really cool. I just talked to the catching coordinator, Michael Barrett, who used to play for the Chicago Cubs. And he went over all of the 7 or so catchers that were in the instructional league in October, and the pluses and minuses for each guy, what they're working on. And so I kind of like to break those things up. And sometimes they'll give you interesting stories. Like Michael told me, they changed things this year, where they took all the pregame strategy guides that they used, that Yan Gomes and Kurt Suzuki, the Nationals catchers, used to face off against teams. And they took them, they brought them to the minor league prospects. They said, look, here's how we get ready for the major league games. And I mean, the players ate that stuff up. They would watch videos, Billy, of a game where Max Scherzer was pitching, and they would stop the video before he would throw the ball to Freddie Freeman. And they would ask the young catcher, who's like 18 or 19 years old, what pitch are you calling here? And they said, I'll call a slider. And then they see Scherzer throw a fastball. Okay, why did he do that? So it's cool stuff like that. Those are deep dive stories that I love to do. And he said the catchers love that stuff. And so those are the kind of stories I'm looking for right now, when there is no baseball, when we're waiting for February 17th, or hoping, I guess, that there is a real spring training. those are the kind of off-season things that I kind of look at to try to deep dive. And the coordinators are good people to know because they'll tell you during the season what's going on. And they're all asking me, Byron, can you come to the minor league games? You can just sit with me in the stands and we'll watch and we'll see how this catcher works. And that's the kind of stuff that's fun, Billy, is to be able to go out and kind of get inside how the team is working and how they're trying to get these guys ready for the major leagues.
You mentioned you travel with the Nationals about once a month or so during normal
Yeah.
times. What's the favorite place you've traveled to?
That's a great question. I love going to the famous places. Like I remember doing the series at Dodger Stadium when they played the Dodgers in the 16 postseason. And you go to the press box, Billy, and you look for your name, and it says Byron Kerr, MASNsports.com. You look, I sit down, I have the seat right behind home plate at Dodger Stadium. I'm like, I fooled these people. They think that I'm a legit, journalist or something like that. So, that's the kind of places that are real special for me because of the historic value. And I got to go back a couple times during the regular season to places like that. But I've gone. I went to Houston in 2017 before they, won the World Series. And that was interesting to go to some of these places and see how those teams like get ready for games. I noticed how loud the speaker system was at Minute Maid Park and, just like at Castle Coliseum or at Lane Stadium, how do they try to get their fans going for each team? And every team's marketing does a little bit of different things to try to get their teams going. I noticed how loud and crazy it was at Minute Maid Park. And that can be a home court advantage as well. So, those are the funds, but I just think I'll do a lot of games in Philly, New York, and Miami because they play them in Atlanta. They play them a lot. So mostly it's those places to go to. But I think that, I think Dodger Stadium was probably one of the more special places I've gotten to call a game at or watch
That's
a game.
all. Yeah, that's sort of awesome for sure. Byron, what's your advice to young broadcasters like myself who are trying to make it an already tough business during this pandemic? I mean, you are very versatile. You do writing, you do broadcasting, you work for a bunch of different teams. I mean, what is your advice to us as we try to navigate an already tough business in a situation like this pandemic?
Volunteer for everything, Billy. There will be situations where you'll get called to do something and they're not going to pay you. And just to do it, the exposure is so important. Just like social media is important right now. Volunteer, do it for free, because eventually when you're as good as you are, they'll notice, and that could be your door into getting a job there. Never say no if they say, well, we're not going to pay you. Never say no. That's the best advice. I've made that mistake a couple of times where I'm like, okay, I've done a few free ones. Can you start paying me? And they never call you back. So don't do that. Okay, Billy, do it for free. Eventually your talent, eventually your know-how will come through and they'll say, okay, this guy's good enough to hire here. And they'll want to hire you, Billy, because they've seen you work in a capacity where you weren't getting paid and you were doing 110% and you were good at it. And they already know you, they're familiar with you. So that's my best advice for any young broadcaster or any young journalist. Do it for free if they say so, and eventually they'll offer you a job.
Yeah, that's certainly some great advice for sure. I wanted to ask you because off the field, you are a Broncos fan, which I've seen you tweet about. So, where did that fandom start, and what are some of your favorite memories? Following the Broncos.
Yeah, my dad was in the Air Force, so that's how we got here to the Pentagon a long time ago. So I lived in Colorado when I was a kid, and the first games I ever went to, we would ride our bikes in Boulder to see CU play. So that's my first memory of college football. Also, he taught at the Air Force Academy, so I used to go watch Air Force games. So that was my first memory. Like I think some Denver Bronco came to my school, Lyle Zato or something, and read a book to us, and I'm like, oh my God. So when you're an Air Force brat and you don't really have a hometown, that was kind of how I fell in love with the Broncos. And over the years, I've been very lucky to be able to I've gone to 3 of the Super Bowls to see them play. Got to see them beat Green Bay and Atlanta, and they lost to Seattle. But I made a connection over the years where I could, with someone that worked for the NFL. And so that was something that I'll never forget. And yeah, it's very strange to be living in DC and be the fan of a team that's, 2,000 miles away. So every time you go to a Denver game, you're the opposing team. and they don't want you there. So many Ravens games where I've watched them get their butts kicked, and it's not a lot of fun. But yeah, that's where that all started. And we actually got to go back to Colorado last month to go skiing, and so I got to go see my old stomping ground, some of my old houses there, and I was wearing my Denver stuff, and we'd go to a restaurant, and I mispronounced the name of the restaurant. The guy's looking at me like, you don't know how to pronounce the name of this restaurant? You have Bronco stuff on. He goes, I go, oh, I'm not from here. I'm just wearing Bronco stuff. And Lisa's like, my wife's like, you should have worn Virginia stuff so people know that you're not from here. So that was a pretty funny anecdote. But yeah, that's how it all started. And just like I know how diehard Virginia Tech fans are, that's how I am with Denver. And it's kind of strange to be living in Virginia and being a Denver fan.
Well, I didn't know you attended a Super Bowl. So, I mean, what is that experience like? I mean, going to see the biggest game in person, especially when your team is playing. And does part of you miss that, you're not watching TV, you're not seeing the commercials, or you go back and see them later? I mean, what's that like to actually be in person for probably the biggest game in American sports?
Yeah, it was pretty special. That first one, when Denver beat Green Bay and Elway won his first Super Bowl, you had watched them lose, like the Buffalo Bills fans had watched their team lose 4 Super Bowls. So to see them break through like that, I mean, that's a moment I'll never forget. And it's really like, going to a football game when they take those timeouts, it's what, 3 or 4 minutes, and the players are just standing there on the field. Same thing happens in the Super Bowl. It's really weird how the TV version looks a lot different, obviously. And yeah, you miss out on the commercials, but I wouldn't trade. I remember driving up with my buddy Jeff, who is not a Broncos fan. People are holding up the signs, $4,000 for your tickets, and he's like, Byron, we could go to a 5-star hotel and just watch it on TV, and we'd still have $3,000, And I said, no, I'm here to see the game. I want to go into the game. So that, I got to go to all those, and then I got to go to the Seattle one at MetLife, and it was a perfect setup for an East Coast NFL fan. I got to take Amtrak. There was millions of hotel rooms in New York. Everything was cheap. I go to the game, and just like the Cleveland-Pittsburgh game yesterday, the first snap goes over the head of Peyton Manning, and all heck breaks loose, and they get their butts kicked, and people are throwing Skittles on me and telling me Peyton Manning's terrible, and the ticket price was $1,000 for that game, Billy. So I was like, in the stands like this going, oh my God, this is a nightmare. So I decided for Super Bowl 50 that I would just watch at home with my family, because if they lost, I could go cry on my pillow. And if they won, I'd be with my family, So, it all worked out. And yeah, those are moments I'll never forget. I've been very lucky and blessed to have that connection, to be able to go to these games and like, see your favorite team win the biggest game is pretty special stuff.
That's definitely awesome. Sure. Byron, you obviously work a lot, like I mentioned, with several different teams. So when you're not working, what are some things you like to do in your free time?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Netflix, a lot, we just did some skiing. So I do some skiing. I'm not very good. The rest of the family's much better than me. They'll go down with me on the first run. And then after a while, they'll be like, okay, we'll meet, Byron, you go down the greens and we'll go down the blues and the blacks, and we'll see you later. So get the chance to do that. And I have, 3 kids who are almost all teenagers now. So I get to be a youth baseball coach. I get to watch my daughter play field hockey on varsity at Justice High School. I get to see my son play soccer. So that's kind of the fun things I get to do now, is to watch them grow up and watch them be a part of sports. And, I get to yell from the stands, and people look back at me and go, who's that guy screaming at their kid? So good things, not bad things. But yeah, those are the things I kind of get a chance to be a part of now and do when I'm not. But there's so much sports. Like, I'm always doing something sports related, whether it's watching it or whether it's participating with my kids. So that's a lot of fun.
That's awesome, Byron. And you've been so gracious with your time. So I have one more final question for you. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? I mean, you're doing all this stuff with the Nationals, with George Washington. You're calling games on a bunch of different platforms. I know 2020/2021 felt like it was 10 years in and of itself, but is that something you can visualize? Is there something you want to do in 10 years? Or are you pretty content right now with what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I always love being the voice of a team. I know, how much it meant for John Laser to get the job at Virginia Tech, and I've known him for many years, and that's a passion that I've had since I was a little kid, when I would go to sleep listening to the Denver Nuggets, when I would go to sleep, and always was a dream of mine. So to be the voice of a team, that's something that I've always wanted to do, and I want to continue to do that, and hopefully I can for the next 10 years, whether it's in college or in the NBA or something like that. So that's always a dream that I have of mine. That those are the moments that you never forget, where I know you do this, Billy, at Castle Coliseum, and you see the ball go up and you're like, wow, I'm sitting on press row and I'm calling this game or something like that. I mean, I would do it for free. You know what I mean? That's the kind of that's what my we go back to the free thing again, right? That's what I want my life to be, is to do something that's so much fun that I would do it for free. I used to do that when I was a kid. I would have the tape recorder by the TV, turn down the volume, and call the game on the tape recorder, and then listen back and go, oh, that was good, or that wasn't so good, or listen to my favorite guys. And so, yeah, that's what I want to be doing in 10 years, is doing something that is a lot of fun, and I would do for free. And that's why I'm so lucky to be able to do all this stuff, because I would do it for free.
That's definitely awesome to hear. Byron, this has been such a pleasure. You've been so gracious with your time. Can't tell you how much I appreciate our conversation today.
Hey, great to talk with you, Billy. Good luck, and hopefully we can shake hands in person, and we get to a moment where we can have 60 or 70, 80,000 fans together at Lane Stadium and be able to watch, our teams play again in person and get back to a normal working environment. But I really appreciate you reaching out too. It's been fun to reminisce.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely enjoyed this conversation. Well, thank you so much to Byron Kerr, George Washington, Washington Nationals. He's also a freelance play-by-play announcer for a bunch of different platforms. This has been the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.